The tears streaming down Tessa Turner's face turned the freshly dug earth beneath her husband's headstone into mud as the townsfolk of Willow Creek dispersed from the funeral, their whispers still stinging her ears. It was 1878, and at 30 years old, Tessa found herself alone in the unforgiving Colorado territory, with nothing but a struggling farm and the weight of unfulfilled promises. "Such a shame," she overheard Mrs. Peterson say to another woman as they walked away. "Robert Turner deserved better than a barren wife. Now his family name dies with him." Tessa clutched her black shawl tighter around her shoulders. 6 years of marriage had yielded no children, and now that Robert had succumbed to pneumonia, the whispers that had once been confined to parlor rooms were spoken openly, as if her inability to bear children somehow lessened the grief she felt. Tessa remained by the grave until the last of the mourners had gone, the setting sun casting long shadows across the cemetery. Only then did she allow herself to collapse, her sobs echoing across the empty hillside. "Madam, are you all right?" the deep voice startled her. Tessa hastily wiped her eyes and looked up to see a tall man standing a respectful distance away. His weathered face suggested he was in his late 30s, and his clothes, though clean for the occasion, marked him as a working man. The way he held his hat in his hands conveyed a gentle respect. "I'm fine, thank you," Tessa replied automatically, rising to her feet and brushing dirt from her black dress. "I'm Marshall Kane," he said. "I worked with your husband at the lumber mill last winter. I wanted to pay my respects but arrived late." Tessa nodded, remembering Robert mentioning a hard-working widower who'd recently moved to town. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Kane. Just Marshall, please." His eyes, a startling shade of blue against his sun-darkened skin, held genuine sympathy. "Do you have someone to walk you home, Mrs. Turner?" "I can manage," Tessa said, though the thought of returning to her empty house made her stomach clench. Marshall nodded, respectfully keeping his distance. "I understand. Just know that if you need any help with the farm, many of us who respected Robert would be willing to lend a hand." As Tessa walked home alone, she realized Marshall Kane was the first person that day who hadn't looked at her with pity or judgment. The following weeks were a blur of endless tasks. The small farm Robert had purchased with such hope 3 years ago now seemed impossibly large for Tessa to manage alone. The mortgage payments loomed, and the wheat crop needed tending. Despite her best efforts, Tessa knew she was fighting a losing battle. One afternoon, as she struggled to repair a broken fence post, the sound of approaching horses made her look up. Marshall Kane rode toward her, accompanied by 2 boys, one about 12, the other perhaps 10. Both had their father's striking blue eyes. "Mrs. Turner," Marshall called, dismounting his horse. "I hope you don't mind us stopping by. My boys and I were heading back from town and noticed your fence needed mending." The older boy jumped down from his horse. "Pa says you might need some help around the farm." Tessa straightened, her pride warring with practicality. "That's kind of you, but I can manage." Marshall's expression remained respectful, but his eyes took in the poorly repaired fence, the overgrown fields, and the dark circles beneath Tessa's eyes. "My boys and I have finished our chores for the day. Thomas here is quite handy with repairs, and James has a way with animals. We'd be happy to help for an hour or two, no obligation." Before Tessa could protest further, Thomas had already picked up her hammer and was examining the fence post with a critical eye. "This needs to be set deeper, madam. It'll just come loose again otherwise." James, the younger boy, had wandered over to where Tessa's milk cow was grazing. "Your Bessie looks like she might have a touch of hoof rot starting. We've got a remedy that works real good." Tessa found herself outnumbered. "I suppose I could use a little help, just for today." That evening, after the Kanes had departed, Tessa sat on her porch, looking out at the properly mended fence, the watered garden, and the healthy-looking cow. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt a tiny spark of hope. That one-time help soon became a regular occurrence. Every few days, Marshall and his sons would ride over, spending a couple of hours helping with whatever needed doing. Marshall never overstepped, always asking permission before tackling any task, and the boys brought a lively energy that had been missing from the farm. One evening, as Marshall chopped firewood while his sons tended to the chickens, Tessa brought out a pitcher of lemonade. "You and your boys have been too kind," she said, pouring him a glass. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Marshall wiped his brow with his sleeve before accepting the drink. "No repayment necessary, Mrs. Turner. My boys need the extra work to keep them out of mischief." Tessa smiled, watching Thomas patiently showing James how to gather eggs without frightening the hens. "They're wonderful boys." "You've raised them well." A shadow crossed Marshall's face. "Their mother deserves most of the credit. She passed 4 years ago. Fever took her quickly." "I'm sorry," Tessa said softly. "It must be difficult raising them alone." Marshall nodded. "Some days are harder than others." "The boys miss having a woman's influence." He looked at her directly. "And folks around here can be mighty quick to judge what they don't understand." Tessa felt her cheeks warm, knowing he must have heard the town gossip about her. "Yes, they certainly can be." As summer progressed into fall, Tessa found herself looking forward to the Kanes' visits more than she cared to admit. The boys began stopping by on their own sometimes, helping her with chores after school. Thomas, the serious one, showed a talent for carpentry, while James's gentle way with animals was remarkable for a boy his age. One afternoon, Tessa was teaching James how to make apple pie when she heard raised voices from town coming toward her property. She stepped onto the porch to see Mrs. Peterson leading a group of women from the church auxiliary. "There you are," Mrs. Peterson said, her pinched face radiating disapproval. "And with one of the Kane boys, I see. It's precisely this impropriety we've come to discuss." Tessa felt her body stiffen. "James is helping me bake. There's nothing improper about that," Mrs. Peterson sniffed. "A widow, alone with a child not her own, with no chaperone, and this isn't the first time. The whole town is talking, Tessa." "The whole town should find better things to do," Tessa replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Another woman stepped forward. "We understand your situation is difficult, but there are boundaries. Mr. Kane is an unmarried man. His boys need proper guidance, not." She gestured vaguely at Tessa, whatever this arrangement is. James had come to stand beside Tessa, flower still on his hands. "My pa says Mrs. Turner is a lady and deserves respect," he said firmly. Mrs. Peterson's eyes narrowed. "Out of the mouths of babes, this proves our point. These children are being influenced improperly." "I think it's time you ladies left," Tessa said, placing a protective hand on James's shoulder. "We're only thinking of your reputation," Mrs. Peterson insisted, "and of those poor motherless boys." Something inside Tessa snapped. "Those poor motherless boys have a father who loves them dearly and is raising them to be kind, hard-working young men, which is more than I can say for some children in this town who have been taught to repeat cruel gossip." The women gasped, and Mrs. Peterson drew herself up indignantly. "Well, I never thank you for your concern," Tessa cut her off, "but I assure you the Kanes and I are behaving with perfect propriety. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a pie to finish." After the women left, Tessa's hands trembled as she returned to the kitchen. James looked up at her with worried eyes. "Are you in trouble because of us, Mrs. Turner?" Tessa forced a smile. "No, sweetheart, people just like to talk, that's all." Later that evening, when Marshall came to collect James, Tessa reluctantly told him about the visit from the church ladies. "I'm so sorry," she said. "The last thing I want is to cause problems for you and the boys." Marshall's expression darkened. "You have nothing to apologize for. It's this town that should be ashamed." He hesitated, then added quietly, "But perhaps it would be best if the boys didn't come by alone for a while." Tessa nodded, feeling a strange emptiness at the thought. "Of course, I understand." The next few weeks were painfully quiet. Marshall and the boys still came to help occasionally, but their visits were shorter, more formal. Tessa missed the easy companionship they had developed, the laughter of the boys, and though she barely admitted it to herself, Marshall's quiet strength and gentle humor. The first snow of winter came early that year. Tessa woke one morning to find her world transformed into a white blanket. As beautiful as it was, the cold seeped through the old farmhouse's thin walls, and she spent the day feeding the wood stove and worrying about her livestock. As dusk approached, the snow began falling again, heavier this time. Tessa had just finished securing the chicken coop when she heard horses approaching. Through the swirling snow, she made out 3 familiar figures. "Marshall, boys, what are you doing out in this weather?" Marshall dismounted, his face grim beneath his snow-dusted hat. "Storm's getting worse. We were in town when it hit, and I was worried about you out here alone." Thomas and James were already heading toward the barn, leading their horses and Marshall's. "We brought extra supplies, Mrs. Turner," Thomas called over his shoulder. "Pa said we might get snowed in." Tessa looked at Marshall questioningly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This storm looks bad, Tessa. The banker in town was saying it might be like the blizzard of '65. I couldn't just leave you out here alone." "But what will people say?" Tessa whispered. Even as relief flooded through her, Marshall's expression was resolute. "Let them talk. I'd rather face gossip than know I left you to face this storm alone." By midnight, the storm had become a full-blown blizzard. Wind howled around the farmhouse, finding every crack and crevice. Inside, the 4 of them huddled near the wood stove. James and Thomas had fallen asleep on a makeshift bed of blankets on the floor, while Tessa and Marshall sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices. "The boys have grown so much since spring," Tessa observed, watching the sleeping children. "Thomas is nearly as tall as you now." Marshall smiled fondly. "He's a good boy, both of them are. They think the world of you, you know." Tessa felt her cheeks warm, "And I of them." She hesitated, then added, "I've missed having them around these past weeks." "They've missed you too." Marshall stared into his cup of coffee. "Tessa, there's something I should tell you. I've been offered a job, a good one, managing a cattle ranch near Denver." Tessa felt her heart sink. "Oh, when would you leave?" "After winter. The pay is better than what I make at the sawmill, and there's a decent house on the property. It would be a fresh start for me and the boys." "That sounds wonderful," Tessa said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "A great opportunity." Marshall nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. "Except that the boys don't want to go. They've put down roots here, first real home they've had since their mother died." He looked at her directly. "And to be honest, I'm finding the idea of leaving more difficult than I expected." The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Tessa found her voice. "Why is that?" Marshall set his cup down carefully. "I think you know, Tessa." Before she could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows and James stirred in his sleep. The moment passed and Marshall stood to add another log to the stove. The blizzard lasted 3 days. Trapped together in the small farmhouse, they fell into a surprising domestic rhythm. Marshall and Thomas kept the fire going and cleared paths to the barn to tend the animals. James helped Tessa in the kitchen, and they all shared meals around the table, telling stories and playing card games in the evenings. On the afternoon of the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The world outside was transformed into a vast white landscape, drifts of snow taller than a man in some places. Marshall stepped onto the porch, surveying the damage. "Roads won't be passable for days yet," he said when Tessa joined him. "But at least we can get proper wood chopped now." Tessa nodded, watching her breath form clouds in the cold air. "I don't know how I would have managed alone. Thank you, Marshall." He turned to her, his expression serious. "Tessa, when this is over and we can get back to town, there's going to be talk." "I know," she sighed. "More than before." "I've been thinking," Marshall said carefully, "maybe we should give them something real to talk about." Tessa's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Marshall took a deep breath. "I mean that these past months, getting to know you, seeing how you are with my boys. It's made me realize what's been missing in our lives." He stepped closer. "I'm not asking because of the gossip or because it's convenient. I'm asking because I can't imagine my life, our lives, without you in it." Tessa stared at him, stunned. "Marshall, are you, Pa, Mrs. Turner, come quick." Thomas's urgent call interrupted them. They rushed to the barn where the boys were tending to the animals. Inside, they found Thomas and James kneeling beside Tessa's milk cow, Bessie, who was lying on her side in the straw, breathing heavily. "I think she's calving, Pa," James said excitedly. "But something's wrong." Marshall immediately knelt beside the cow, examining her with gentle hands. "The calf's turned wrong. We need to help her or we'll lose them both." For the next hour, they worked together to save Bessie and her calf. Marshall's strong hands guided the calf into the proper position while Tessa and the boys provided support and encouragement. Finally, with one last push from Bessie, a wet, trembling calf slid into the world. "It's a heifer," James exclaimed as the tiny cow struggled to stand on wobbly legs. Tessa watched in wonder as Bessie began to clean her newborn. "I had no idea she was with calf. Robert must have arranged for her to be bred before he fell ill." Marshall smiled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Life finds a way, doesn't it? Even in the harshest conditions." That evening, after checking on Bessie and her calf one last time, they returned to the house. The boys went to bed early, exhausted from the day's excitement, leaving Tessa and Marshall alone by the fire. "You were saying something earlier," Tessa said quietly, before we were interrupted. Marshall set down his coffee cup. "I was, and seeing you today, the way you didn't hesitate to do what needed doing, how gentle you were with that calf." He moved to sit beside her. "Tessa, I know it hasn't been that long since Robert passed, and maybe this is too soon, but I've come to care for you, deeply." Tessa's heart pounded in her chest. "The town will talk more than ever." "Let them." Marshall took her hand. "Tessa Turner, would you consider becoming Tessa Kane? Would you consider being a mother to my boys and letting us be a family together?" Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "People will say you only want me to look after your sons, that I'm desperate for a husband and children." Marshall's eyes were steady on hers. "People will always talk. The question is, do we live our lives for their approval or for our happiness?" Tessa thought of the lonely months after Robert's death, of the cruel whispers about her barrenness, of the judgment she'd faced. Then she thought of Marshall's quiet strength, of Thomas's serious determination, of James's infectious laughter. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "Yes, I would be honored to become your wife, Marshall Kane." His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Gently, he leaned forward and kissed her, a promise of the life they would build together. It took nearly a week before the roads were clear enough to travel into town. When they finally made the journey, Marshall insisted on speaking to the minister immediately to arrange the wedding. The boys waited outside while Tessa and Marshall sat in Reverend Clark's study. "This is rather sudden," the Reverend said, looking between them with poorly concealed suspicion. "Perhaps to others," Marshall replied evenly, "but Tessa and I have known our minds for some time." "Mrs. Turner, your husband has been gone less than a year," Reverend Clark reminded her gently, "and there has already been talk." "With all due respect, Reverend," Tessa interrupted, "the time I had with Robert was a blessing, and I will always honor his memory. But he would not have wanted me to remain alone out of some sense of propriety." The Reverend sighed. "And you were snowbound together for nearly a week. People can assume what they like," Marshall said firmly, "but I won't have Tessa's reputation questioned. We wish to be married as soon as possible." Reluctantly, the Reverend agreed to perform the ceremony the following Sunday. As they left the church, they found Mrs. Peterson and several other women from the auxiliary waiting outside, not even pretending they hadn't been eavesdropping. "Well," Mrs. Peterson said with a tight smile, "I see the rumors were true. How convenient for both of you." Marshall stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Tessa. "Mrs. Peterson, I understand you're a woman of strong convictions. So you'll understand when I say that I love Tessa with all my heart, and I won't have anyone, not even a respected member of the church, speak ill of her." Mrs. Peterson blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct confrontation. "I merely meant, I know exactly what you meant," Marshall continued, his voice still polite but firm. And I would appreciate it if you would extend to my future wife the same Christian charity you expect from others." Taking Tessa's arm, he guided her past the stunned women to where the boys were waiting with the horses. "That was remarkable," Tessa said when they were out of earshot. Marshall smiled down at her. "Just getting started, Mrs. Almost Kane." The wedding was a simple affair, attended by the few friends they had in town, and surprisingly, most of the church auxiliary, including Mrs. Peterson, who brought a patchwork quilt as a gift. Whether motivated by genuine goodwill or a desire to save face, Tessa accepted it graciously. After the ceremony, they moved Tessa's belongings to Marshall's modest house on the edge of town. It was smaller than her farmhouse but sturdier, with enough room for all four of them. Marshall arranged to lease Tessa's farm to a young couple newly arrived from back east, ensuring she would still have income from the property. Their first evening as a family, they sat around the dinner table, the boys unusually quiet and well-behaved. "So," Marshall said, breaking the silence. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Kane?" Tessa smiled, still getting used to her new name. "Wonderful, though I think these two young men are being suspiciously polite." Thomas and James exchanged glances. Finally, Thomas spoke up. "We were wondering, what should we call you now?" Tessa's heart melted at the uncertainty in the boy's voice. "Whatever feels right to you," she said gently. "Tessa is fine, or Mrs. Kane if you prefer." James fidgeted with his fork. "Could we maybe call you Ma? Not right away if that feels strange, but someday." Tears sprang to Tessa's eyes. "Oh, James, you could call me Ma right now if you wanted to. Nothing would make me happier." The boys grinned, the tension broken. That night, as Tessa and Marshall prepared for bed in their new shared bedroom, she found herself overcome with emotion. "They called me Ma at bedtime," she whispered. "Both of them." Marshall wrapped his arms around her. "They've been wanting a mother for so long, and you were made to be their mother, Tessa Kane." She buried her face against his chest. "But what if we never have children of our own? What if I'm truly barren?" Marshall tilted her face up to his. "Then we'll have two wonderful sons and count ourselves blessed." "But Tessa, sometimes these things take time, and sometimes when the pressure is off and the heart is happy, nature finds a way." As winter gave way to spring, the newlywed Kanes settled into life as a family. The boys thrived under Tessa's care, and Marshall found that coming home to a warm house filled with the sounds of his family brought a joy he'd almost forgotten could exist. The gossip in town gradually subsided as people found new topics of interest. Mrs. Peterson even stopped by one afternoon to invite Tessa to join the quilting circle, an olive branch that Tessa gladly accepted. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Marshall noticed Tessa seemed distracted. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Kane?" She turned to him with a mysterious smile. "I was just thinking about how we might need to build an addition to the house." Marshall raised an eyebrow. "Oh, are the boys complaining about sharing a room again?" "No," Tessa said, taking his hand and placing it gently over her still flat stomach. "But in about 7 months we're going to need a nursery." Marshall stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "Tessa, are you saying we're having a baby?" she confirmed, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "It seems I wasn't barren after all." Marshall let out a whoop that startled the chickens in the yard, then gathered Tessa in his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. "Careful with your wife, Mr. Kane. I'm in a delicate condition, you know." He set her down gently, cradling her face in his hands. "You are the strongest woman I know, Tessa Kane, and you're going to be the most wonderful mother to all 3 of our children." When they told the boys the news the next morning, their reactions were everything Tessa could have hoped for. Thomas, practical as always, immediately began planning where the baby's cradle would go, while James peppered them with questions about whether it would be a brother or sister. "Either way," James declared, "I'm going to teach them how to fish and ride and everything." In November of 1879, Tessa gave birth to a healthy baby girl whom they named Eleanor, after Marshall's mother. As Tessa held her daughter for the first time, with Marshall and the boys gathered around her bed, She thought about the journey that had brought her here from the depths of grief and loneliness to this moment of pure joy. "She's perfect," Marshall whispered, gently stroking the baby's tiny hand with his finger. "She looks like you, Ma," Thomas said, studying his new sister with serious eyes. James leaned in close. "Hello, Eleanor. I'm your big brother, James, and that's your other big brother, Thomas. We've been waiting a real long time for you." Tessa looked up at her family, her husband, with tears in his eyes, her stepsons already fiercely protective of their baby sister, and the tiny miracle in her arms, and knew that every tear she had shed, every whispered judgment she had endured, had led her to this perfect moment. "I love you all so much," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Marshall bent to kiss her forehead. "And we love you, Mrs. Kane, more than you could ever know." 3 years later, the Kane family had grown again with the addition of a son, Robert Marshall Kane. On a warm summer evening, Tessa sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Marshall taught Thomas how to saddle a new horse, while James chased little Eleanor around the yard, her giggles floating on the breeze. Baby Robert slept peacefully in Tessa's arms, his tiny hand clutching her finger. Mrs. Peterson walked up the path, carrying a basket. In the years since Tessa and Marshall's wedding, the older woman had become, surprisingly, one of Tessa's closest friends. "Good evening, Tessa," she called. "I brought some of those muffins the children like." "Martha, you're too kind," Tessa replied, genuinely pleased to see her. Mrs. Peterson settled into the chair beside Tessa, smiling at the sleeping baby. "Such a beautiful family you have. The Lord has truly blessed you." Tessa nodded, remembering a time when such words from this woman would have cut like knives. "He has indeed, in ways I never expected." As the sun set over their home, Tessa Kane, once mocked and pitied as a barren widow, watched her husband gather their 4 children for the evening meal, and knew that sometimes the most beautiful blessings come disguised as our greatest sorrows.